Hi, this is JP and you're watching the Coffee Channel, and we are bringing you the highlights from London Coffee Festival 2022. Now, we made the annual visit up to the Coffee Festival. It's not been on for a few years, and it's a few years since I've been before that, but we thought we'd go and pick out some of the highlights of the festival itself. Now, it's a bit of a strange event in some ways because it's absolutely enormous now. It was pretty big the last time I went 4 or 5 years ago, but it's got absolutely gigantic since that point. I spoke to one of the exhibitors and they told me that it was around 26,000 people who are going to be coming. They made out that that was going to be in one day, but I think that was the entire 4 days. Now, we went during the trade day, which wasn't really a trade day. The last time I went on a trade day, you could only get tickets if you had a coffee business, and the tickets were free, if I remember correctly. This time round, it seemed that anyone could buy them and just go on a Thursday or Friday. So it was a lot busier than previous trade days. It wasn't as busy as one of the weekend days, but it was still super, super busy. And rather than one floor as it had in previous years, there were 4 floors. And it was incredibly impenetrable as to where everything was, because you couldn't get to all floors by the same staircase. Some staircases were blocked off for VIPs. Some staircases didn't lead to the floors you wanted them to lead to. There were various halls and sub-halls. It seemed like it was designed by the same person who designed the labyrinth in the myth of Theseus. Or, to use a less literary reference, the person who designed your local IKEA. It was absolutely incomprehensible in terms of where everything was, even with a map. We only found our way to the lower ground floor with about an hour to go. We'd been there for like 4 or 5 hours, and we finally found this lower ground floor where all these things that we hadn't seen before were suddenly there. We walked around in circles for hours. It was extremely bizarre. But there were quite a few highlights, and I'm going to pick out a few of these things to mull over, maybe, see what you think. The first one that was really interesting was the prevalence of non-dairy. Now, this is your oat milks, your soya milks, but also your non-dairy products. So we tried some amazing ice cream by a company called Dappa, and it was a non-dairy ice cream. And unlike other non-dairy ice creams I've tried, it actually tasted really, really good. And I wouldn't have known that it wasn't dairy. In fact, as a soft serve, like a whippy style ice cream, it actually tasted much better than the whippy you get from a normal place, or even somewhere doing it quite good with dairy. And they did a very, very good collaboration with All Press roasters and an espresso based ice cream, which was actually really delicious. It wasn't overpoweringly coffee focused, but it was just right. It was sweet, it was balanced, you could taste the coffee, but it wasn't overpowering. I thought that was a really great ice cream product they had there. There were lots of other stalls doing non-dairy milk. So we looked at a company called Mylk, which have developed non-dairy milk with James Hoffmann, which they say tastes more like dairy than other non-dairy milks. So it was an oat-based recipe with a few other ingredients in it. I tried some. Actually, I thought it tasted pretty good. I didn't get to try out how it textured myself. I'm not sure if it was better than Oatly, who are also there doing a collaboration with our local roaster Roundhill. And I tried the Oatly and I tried the Mylk one after the other as much as I could. I still think I prefer the Oatly, but the Mylk is another alternative and it is available in supermarkets now, such as Tesco's and obviously Whole Foods stores. So I guess this is a nod towards the fact that veganism is a much bigger thing than it was 4 or 5 years ago when I was last at the coffee festival. Hardly any of the stands were serving milk drinks. They were all serving oat or soya based drinks for the milk, flat whites, lattes, etc. Only a few places had actual dairy milk, which is quite unusual compared to how it used to be a few years ago. One of the other things we noticed were some quite amazing coffee machines from major and less major manufacturers. The interesting thing is the cost of this has gone absolutely sky high. This La Marzocco FB80 that we use, I think was about £6,500 when it was new. I tested a couple machines whilst I was there at the coffee festival, which were over 17,000 plus VAT. So you're looking at over £20,000 for a 2-group machine, which is absolutely astonishing. It's like, knowing as I do how much specialty coffee shops make, it's very difficult to see how you're going to get that investment back very quickly unless you've got a very, very, very popular store. So I suspect that most of the people who are buying these machines are going to be doing it through a roastery. They'll get some sort of deal where they get a wholesale price on the machine and it's paid for by ordering a certain amount of coffee from that roastery. The problem with that is it sort of ends up with the disappearance of your multi-roaster coffee shop, which was a staple of most cities only a few years ago. Because the equipment's got so expensive, most people are now getting to bed with a single roaster and then having to offer that roaster's coffee as their only coffee. They might be able to offer different single origins, a house espresso and a single origin or something like that, but they're not having different roasters on rotating, which is what I used to do when I had a shop. And I think it's a bit of a sad thing that that's kind of disappearing. So I saw a couple of really innovative machines while I was there. One was a sub-brand of Astoria. Now, Astoria is a big company that's been making espresso machines that you'll see in lots of like quite crappy places like pubs and hotels over the years. And they've really generally had a pretty much mainstream focus. Heat exchanger based machines, cheap, reliable, but they're not the sort of thing you'd ever see in a specialty coffee shop, apart from one machine called the Plus 4U, which was a dual boiler machine that wasn't that successful because it was a little bit over complicated. It had heaters in the group head. It didn't quite look right for specialty coffee, and it also didn't have the name. Astoria didn't really have a name that most specialty coffee shops would really want to have on display. And you've got to remember, the actual coffee machine that you have is kind of a signifier to your audience that you're specialty. So if you have something that says Astoria on it, to a lot of people that won't look like you're a specialty coffee shop. It will look like the sort of machine they see in a pub. So what they've currently done is they've brought out a sub-brand called Storm. And they've got 3 machines at varying prices. The top one was actually over €17,000 plus VAT for a 2-group, which is extraordinarily expensive. But it had some very, very clever features that I haven't seen on any machine. You could adjust almost anything on the fly. So you could adjust the pre-infusion time, but also the amount of water in the pre-infusion, the amount of water in the brew phase, the pressure throughout the entire brewing phase of the coffee, and also the temperature. And you could do this all on the fly on these graphic equalizers. It made it look a bit like a high-end 1980s hi-fi. But you could also do it manually via a lever, which obviously is a little bit less consistent because you're doing different things on the fly. But then you can use an app, links up with your phone, to control all this, so you can then replicate it each time. But the app isn't the only way to access these features. Now that's really good because I remember a few years ago using a San Remo Opera, which has similar sort of features, although not quite as advanced, but it's all controlled by the app. And when you try to connect your phone to the app to control these features, sometimes it didn't connect. And so you're completely lost. You couldn't do a lot of the things that you wanted to do. And it was just not very good, really, for a busy coffee shop. If you wanted to suddenly change the pressure profile or the temperature or something like that, and you had to do it via the app, and you couldn't do it, not the best. This gets around that by having manual control of everything as well as control through the app. So I thought that was a really innovative machine. It's interesting that Astoria have gone for this sub-brand, which they've gone for just upmarket machines. So they're aiming this at specialty coffee. There's no Astoria on it. You wouldn't know it was an Astoria. I mean, I'd forgotten about this brand. I could have sort of seen it somewhere, thought, oh, that's an Astoria brand because I saw the logo and the relation to it. But I'd completely forgotten. So when I saw it, I thought, oh, there's a whole new manufacturer. And it looks really cool. Really interesting looking machine. And their cheaper machines also look like they've got some pretty good features. They've got really good control of group head temperature, dual boilers, all the sort of stuff you'd expect in a specialty machine, and the looks are pretty amazing. So there's something to watch out for. The other machine I saw that was interesting was the Slayer. Now, Slayer have been around for quite a long time now. Seattle-based company originally. They've actually been taken over by La Cimbali, which is a big Italian company. So they've kind of gone a little bit more mainstream. They used to be very kind of exotic. They're still super expensive. Like the single group home machine there is over £8,000. So you've got to have a lot of money if you're going to have that sitting in your kitchen at home, but it looks absolutely amazing. They've got this kind of profiling system for pressure profiling on them. It's always been quite unique with a needle valve, and they produce espresso in a way that's quite different from other machines. So they are really good, and in the past they've been regarded as great machines, but they've never been super reliable, and part supply has always been a bit of an issue because they're such a small company. Now they're owned by Lacimbali, that should be less of a problem, and I think they're another example of a big brand like Lacimbali trying to branch out into the specialty area, because again, Lacimbali machines, you don't really see them in specialty coffee shops. They're more of a traditional sort of machine. You don't really get them in the sort of places that I drink coffee in. They're more of a sort of old Italian style coffee shops, maybe pubs, restaurants, that type of thing, delicatessens. Even their top end machine, which does a lot of stuff, you just don't see it in specialty coffee shops. But with a brand like Slayer, I think you'll see a lot more of those Slayers out there in the world soon, if people can actually afford to buy them in the first place. The other thing that was interesting, had a quick demo on, was the La Mosecco KB90. Now this is a machine that has group heads that you don't insert the portafilter into in the traditional way. You don't push it up and twist it, you push it straight in, and there's a little latch that you then push up to keep it in place. Why is this important? Well, if you ever work in a busy coffee shop, you know that movement of putting the portafilter up and then turning it, if you do it again and again and again, it's really liable to cause repetitive strain injury with baristas. So finding some way of getting around that has been a really good feature. The other cool thing it does is when you release the portafilter by pushing up the little tab, it auto flushes a group head. So there's less button pushing. You don't have to remember to do it each time. It's a really interesting little feature on that machine. It also had gravimetric scales on it, which seemed to work pretty well. So the coffee, instead of being volumetric in terms of the control of it, so on a traditional machine you probably have a volumetric control which will kind of judge how many millilitres of fluid was going through it, and they're never very accurate. This one works on gravimetric, so it's got scales built into the drip tray which automatically feed back to the power button for the group head. So it switches it off automatically, and you should get your coffee at the right weight every time. When I saw it, it was working pretty well. I'm not sure how it would work when you're switching between different coffees, because obviously some coffees run a bit faster than others at the end. It's got to kind of anticipate the amount of coffee that's kind of in the air between the portafilter and the cup at any point, so that it actually stops at the right point. But I think the software's got better and better with this, and these seem to be working pretty well. That one was on the Origin stand. I had a really nice Origin coffee from them running on that one. It tasted good and it looked like a great machine. One of the other trends I noticed was for higher end hot chocolate product. The most notable of these was a stand from Islands, who own their own cocoa farms in St Vincent. What they produced was a drink that was much more like the difference between specialty coffee and traditional coffee when compared with traditional hot chocolate. So I tried a couple of their hot chocolates and they were noticeably lighter, more fruity. There was loads of fruit acidity in the chocolate, but it still had that lovely kind of rich chocolatey feel to it as well. So I think that's something we're going to see more of, because specialty coffee shops have often just bought fairly generic hot chocolate over the years. Something like these sort of products are much more of a sort of value added thing. They're something that non-coffee drinkers and even coffee drinkers might come into your shop to specifically taste, because they're so different from the sort of stuff that you can buy in supermarkets for home use, or even in most coffee shops. It's a really interesting drink. So I thought that was a new trend that I noticed that was really interesting. In terms of the coffees I drank there, it's really difficult to kind of pick out which ones that you want to drink, because there were like hundreds of people giving away coffees, mainly espresso. There's a bit of filter going on as well, and there's everything from really dark roast from people like Illy and the mainstream producers. You have massive stands there that kind of feel slightly out of place with the whole specialty scene and it being in Shoreditch, and you've got sort of Lavazza and Illy and Nespresso, and it seems like who in the audience here is going to go to those places? But I suppose they're kind of raising their brand awareness. There might be some people who like that sort of thing. So what I did is spend a lot of time going around all these different roasters trying to find what looked like the best coffee. I went to a few places. I had a really interesting espresso martini made with rum, mango liqueur and some sort of nitrous, with coffee from Blossom Coffee Roasters, who are based in the north of England. And that was an absolutely delicious drink. It was like something you'd expect to drink at the Coffee and Good Spirits competition. Really tasty espresso. Origin serves some great coffees on their KB90, which I spoke about earlier. I had a lovely Ethiopian Roundhill coffee on their stand that are running in collaboration with Oatly. And then I had a few other coffees at places like Kiss the Hippo, which was good, really tasty. And I pulled some shots myself on the Slayer, and I had a really interesting high-grown Brazilian coffee from Santu Roasters, who are based up in Edinburgh, and they also import the Astoria Storm machine, so they're the distributors for that. It was a really interesting coffee because it's not like typical Brazilian coffees. It's got lots of acidity, it's higher grown, it hasn't got that kind of nutty, hazelnutty, chocolatey taste that works well in milk, but with the low acidity doesn't work that well as an espresso. It actually was a really tasty sort of Colombian style espresso. Pulled that on the Storm machine with a long pre-infusion. It really tasted actually very good. So that's one of my highlights of the festival in terms of coffee. One thing that was quite cool was a company called Penny and Merriweather, who was selling these nice sort of what I called an oil slick finish cupping spoon. Some people refer them to as rainbow coloured cupping spoons, but actually it's a finish that you find on lots of anodised bike components, and it's always been called oil slick because it kind of changes colour as you move it. These are cool cupping spoons. They're just the right size. They're nice and weighty, and we got our logo engraved on it while we were there, which was quite interesting to watch. So we got a bit of footage of that. There are a few things that I noticed that maybe didn't quite work about the festival. One thing I'd say is that there's definitely not enough savoury food there. We queued for quite a long time to get some Italian food, which was okay, but there was hardly anywhere to sit. Now, I can understand why the organisers don't take up loads of space with seating, but it's quite hard to eat pasta and lots of food like arancini balls while you're standing up. So we were lucky to find a seat after a while, but there are lots of people on laptops taking up seats for ages. There were probably only about 30 seats there. And there was only really one other main food provider. Now, obviously, you could go out and go down to Brick Lane and you're in the middle of London. But actually, once you're in there, you really want to stay in. It would have been better to see a few more food places. I mean, I know it's a coffee festival and coffee focused, but there really seem to be far fewer food outlets than there were in previous years. So I think that could be improved. The other thing we found later on was the Coffee Masters. Now, it used to be that the UK Barista Championship was held at the Coffee Festival. It hasn't been the case for a few years now, but they have had the Coffee Masters there, which is a one-off competition. And I don't really think the format worked terribly well. You couldn't really see what was going on if you were sitting down. They had a cameraman, he had what looked like a rocket pack on, this incredibly oversized gimbal thing that looked absolutely ridiculous. And he was filming a bit of the footage to go onto the screens, but it wasn't really clear what was going on. You couldn't hear anything. It's so noisy in there. You sort of were seeing the back of the competitors as judges wandering around, and the actual format of the Masters is far too long. Instead of having 15 minutes per competitor like they do in the Barista Championships, they had like 15 minutes per round per competitor. So there were all these different rounds, and it was all quite incomprehensible. And I don't think many people really knew exactly what was going on or could see anything. So you wonder if it really works. I don't know if it's the case with the Coffee Master itself. I haven't seen it anywhere else. They run different competitions all over the world. So maybe other organisers have got it right. But I think maybe the format didn't work terribly well for London Coffee Festival, where it was situated in the lower ground floor. The other thing is, as I said before, it's completely impenetrable, the whole layout of the place. Now, maybe it's just I've got no sense of direction, but all of us who went found it difficult to find a way round. There are stairs in weird places, and there's these weird VIP stairs, which I don't really understand the point of, because they just go to the same place as the other stairs, but there are sort of bouncers and security people on the door who won't let you down those stairs, but they seem like the only stairs that will go to where you need to go. So the layout isn't terribly good. But other than that, actually, we had a really good time. We caught up with lots of people we haven't seen for a long time. We saw a few innovative things. We saw a couple of things like the Astoria Storm machines that really were something quite different from what's currently out there. And the KB90 as well. Not necessarily a new machine, but it's good to see it in the flesh. Not seen it in operation in many shops yet. So there are a few things like that I thought were really interesting. There's some really interesting stuff going on around the kind of non-dairy aspect of cuisine at the moment and coffee. So those are all things to look out for. I think it was worthwhile to make a visit, and obviously it was very well attended after not being on for a couple of years. I think it still shows that coffee is as popular as it's ever been. If you've been, let us know what you think in the comments below. Did you think it was a good event? Did you enjoy it? Do you think anything can be improved for the future? If you like our videos, like and subscribe. If you want to give us any ideas for new videos that you'd like to see us cover, then drop us a line in the comments below. See you next time.